The war between Ukraine and Russia is escalating. The first week of the new year witnessed striking clashes between both sides in the Ukraine-Russia war. Let's dive right into the hot breaking points that occur on the front lines on the battlefield. Our first stop is the Donetsk region, one of Ukraine's eastern front lines. Days before the new year, the Ukrainian armed forces reinforced the eastern region with long armored convoys. There was a great counterattack preparation in the Ukrainian army against the activities of the invading Russian troops in the region. We have informed you about the efforts of the Ukrainian forces to control the connection road between the central city of Donetsk and Makivka. Kiev soldiers continued critical preparations on this front line, especially on New Year's Eve. Seconds before the new year, they launched offensive fires against the invading troops from the city of Donetsk in the direction of Makivka. Thanks to the Ukrainian army's missile shots with HIMARSs, the Kiev forces, which started to advance successfully on this line, broke the solid defense line of the Russians here. In Bakhmut, located in the north of Donetsk city, counterattacks by Ukrainian soldiers against the Russians had been continuing since New Year. The city of Bakhmut, where fierce fighting is still ongoing, is one of the important front lines. In addition, Russia's insistence to achieve a victory in this region makes this front much more important, because so far, the Moscow army has used almost half of its ammunition reserves in Bakhmut, but Putin's army has not made any significant gains in that city. The commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Valery Zaluzhny, reported that the counterattack in the direction of Donetsk is continuing. He noted that fierce clashes continued on the Svatove-Kreminna border and in the direction of Lysychansk. The most difficult situation continues in the Soledar-Bakhmut-Mayovsk section. There, the invading enemy is stopped by the extra efforts of units of the Ukrainian defense forces. We see that the Ukrainian armed forces managed to hold a position around Avdiivka in the direction of Donetsk and continue counterattack operations. We move further north on the Bakhmut front line and we come across Kreminna. The last time in this region, the Ukrainian forces managed to break through the Russian Kreminna defense line for 4 kilometers, thanks to the striking counterattacks and missile fires they carried out. When we look at the latest situation on this front line, we see that the Kiev army is still pushing the Russian troops from the defensive line. Russian soldiers generally prefer to flee to Peshchana at this time in order to avoid the pressure and counterattack by the Ukrainian army there. Moving further north from Kreminna, we encounter the other critical front line, the Svatove. The latest situation here is also quite complicated, but the Ukrainian forces seem to have suppressed the invading troops in this region quite a bit, because the Moscow troops, who were afraid of possible Ukrainian attacks with each passing day, were almost stuck in Svatove. Although the fact that this region is a little closer to the Russian border relieved the Moscow administration a little, the intelligence that there will be an attack on Svatove in recent days seems to have worried the invading Russian soldiers here. The southeast areas of the Kreminna front line were also very active last night. It was claimed that some of the invading troops in Severodonetsk would advance to the southwest and support Bakhmut's northeast front line. It was claimed that another part would support the Kreminna occupation groups in the western part of Severodonetsk. In short, Ukraine's eastern fronts have been completely chaotic and full of tension. While everyone was wondering where the first movement on the eastern front would start, the sounds of violent explosions and missiles began to echo from Makivka in the Donetsk region. As we mentioned at the beginning of the video, the Ukrainian forces have been trying to deal a heavy blow to the Russians by seizing the connection road between Donetsk city and Makivka and the Kreminna-Svatove highway since the last few days. The Ukrainian army finally succeeded in achieving this goal with the joint operation of Ukraine's 128th Mountain Assault Brigade and 54th Mechanized Artillery Brigade. An incredible operation was carried out on the huge Russian military base in Makivka. The offensive operation carried out by this brigade against the Russian base, supported by the Ukrainian artillery units with HIMARS missiles, drew all the attention to this area, because Ukraine's 128th Mountain Attack Brigade and 54th Mechanized Brigade deployed HIMARS long-range missile systems to target the Russian military base in Makivka from 3 different fronts. And with the onset of the offensive, this Russian military base came under crossfire by these legendary Ukrainian brigades. The severity of the attack increased many times over with the explosion of the ammunition belonging to the Moscow army, which was stored on the floor of the military base during the operation of the Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian attack on the Russian military base in Makivka had a heavy toll on Moscow. It was claimed that at least 400 Russian soldiers were killed and 300 Russian soldiers were injured in the attacks. This list of heavy casualties had the effect of a cold shower in Moscow. It was also claimed that after this attack in Makivka, a small number of Moscow unit soldiers who survived the Russian military base in the region fled towards Kolesnikova. Ukrainian forces continued to break down any obstacles that stood in their way. After the successful attacks in Makivka, Svatove was another target of the Ukrainian army. This week, Kiev soldiers carried out another striking operation in Svatove after devastating the Russian military base in Makivka. As we previously mentioned, the Ukrainian forces destroyed the Russian fortifications in Crimea and arrived in Svatove via Krasnorechensk. Among this Ukrainian group that arrived in Svatove, the presence of the special forces of the 54th Mechanized Brigade of the Kiev Army was quite remarkable. The Ukrainian armed forces had made a great effort for its operation in Svatove and had shifted their special forces to this region. After the attack on the Russian military base in Makivka, the operation of the Kiev Army in Svatove was also quite striking. A large military ammunition depot in Svatove, led by Ukraine's 54th Mechanized Brigade, was targeted by a drone. Every second of the attack against this ammunition depot was recorded from a camera on the UAV used by Ukraine's 54th Mechanized Brigade after the flight of the unmanned aerial vehicle over the Russian ammunition depot. Explosives fell on the building and flames rose to the sky. The explosive release from the UAV also caused the Russian military ammunition inside the building to explode. Then one after another, very violent explosions occurred in the ammunition depot. With the explosion of the Russian military arsenals, the impact of the attack increased exponentially. It took seconds for the flames to rise seriously, creating a huge black smoke in the sky. Images of this striking operation by the 54th Mechanized Brigade were also shared on social media. The violence of the attack was evident in the footage that broke the viewership record. The blow-up of this huge Russian military ammunition depot at Svatove was perhaps one of the most violent explosions since the beginning of the war. The casualty report of this attack was also quite heavy. Losing 400 soldiers in Makivka, Russia lost 500 soldiers in total when the depot in Svatove was blown up. Russian leader Putin and the Kremlin administration, who were shocked, had to keep their silence after these two attacks, because Russia had almost lost 1,000 soldiers in these two attacks alone. With the wounded soldiers, this number rises to 2,000. The details of the drone attack in Svatove were very interesting. It turned out that Ukraine's 54th Mechanized Brigade, before carrying out the offensive operation, observed this Russian ammunition depot and recorded a list of all vehicles and persons entering and leaving the area. It was the first time after a long time that the Ukrainian armed forces had carried out such an organized offensive operation. A perfect example of success in the field of intelligence. The special brigades of the Ukrainian armed forces, which became more popular after two operations, were appreciated by the country's armed forces commander-in-chief, Valery Zaluzhny. Ukraine's 128th Mountain Assault Brigade and 54th Mechanized Brigade came to the fore with their performances in Makivka and Svatove. These two Ukrainian special brigades, which are taking firm steps towards becoming a nightmare of the Russian army, are just some of the heroic units of the Kiev army. The Moscow administration, on the other hand, cannot even respond to the criticism in Russia after these fiasco defeats. A large part of Russian citizens no longer want the Moscow regime, which lost 1,000 soldiers in two attacks, in administration, because these scandals were the last straw in Russia. The current situation of leader Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin is as critical as the situation of Russian troops in Svatove and Makivka. It seems inevitable that a mass uprising will begin again in Russia in the future. We'll wait and see. Thank you for watching us.